Hi, my name is Dave. I am not a professional YouTube creator, but I recently had some interesting challenges putting a joying head unit into my Nissan Frontier. And I thought I would make this YouTube video so that other folks wouldn't run into the same things I ran into. I'll be reading notes off of my screen, so if I'm not looking at you, I'm looking at my notes, so I don't get lost. So here we go. I should mention that this is specifically about what I ran into installing the joying head unit in place of the factory 2013 Rockford Fosgate head unit in my Nissan Frontier. And this is just going to be about my experiences. Don't take it as absolute and gospel. Do your own research, but maybe this will help you. So my 2013 Nissan Frontier came from the factory with the Rockford Fosgate stereo, which was really nice. I chose it because I wanted a stereo that was good enough. I don't expect a pickup truck to have audiophile sound. It's not going to be like a concert hall in there, but I wanted some decent bass and some decent treble. And in 2013, not only did I get a fairly decent sound out of the Rockford Fosgate system, but I got navigation. I got the Bluetooth connection, which allowed me to play music from my phone, which was nice. And there was even a subwoofer in there that was not too bad. So for 2013, it was pretty good. This is not 2013. Things change. I won't be talking about any other Nissan head units in this video, so if you're looking at something other than the 2013 Rockford Fosgate stereo that was in a Nissan Frontier, this may not be for you. You may find it informational, but it may not match what you have to do. I'm also not going to be taking time to talk about how to do soldering, how to take the dashboard apart, any of the other mechanics associated with doing this work. There's a bunch of videos already on YouTube that do a great job. In fact, I used them to understand how do you disassemble the dashboard, the best ways to make sure the soldering is going to work. And yeah, I did the whole flux and shrink wrap and all that. It worked great. But I'm not going to talk about those things. I'll let you find other YouTube videos to understand how that works. I'm going to focus on how do you use a joying head unit in place of a Rockford Fosgate head unit? So if the Rockford Fosgate unit was so good, why in the world would I replace it? Well, screen size. 2013, it was okie dokie by today's standards. It's pretty dang small. Plus, my eyes aren't getting any younger. So I can't just pull my cell phone out and use that. It's a little small too. I wanted something that was pretty good size. The AM radio reception on the Rockford Fosgate unit was terrible. It was abysmal. And if you want to get those traffic alerts while you're going down a freeway, it was really hard to understand what was being said. The radio was just really poorly designed. It was not great. I didn't like having to pay for maps if I was going to update the maps in the Frontier. You know, here's $120 to get a memory card so you can update the map. No, didn't like that. And in the meantime, the truck itself, low miles. I mean, I just don't drive it that much. It runs great. So replacing the head unit made a whole lot more sense than replacing the entire truck. So what did I pick? I picked the joying 10.5-inch double din. I got some pieces of paper and some cardboard, and I did some sort of sizing inside the cab of the truck, trying to figure out what was going to fit. And the 10.5-inch fits in there pretty well. It does interfere just a little bit with the ventilation. The ventilation still works. It's just reaching to them is a little bit more work, but it's certainly not, any kind of a deal breaker. So that was a thing. I wouldn't go any bigger than 10.5 inches. You start to block off the vents, but at 10.5 inches, it just fits. I also knew that Joying in particular, as one of the Android units, they had built-in steering wheel controls, which meant that was one less module I had to purchase. So I wanted to use as much of the original equipment as I could while getting the big screen for easier navigation and readability and better radio. So I wanted to continue to use the Rockford Fosgate amplifiers, the Rockford Fosgate speakers, the existing GPS antenna, the steering wheel controls, the backup camera. In the center console, there's a USB output or input. I wanted to be able to use that. And the internal microphone that's in the ceiling of the cab. And with one minor exception, I got all of that. The only exception was the microphone. And I'll come back to that in a minute. There was also in the radio, the previous radio had the XM Sirius satellite reception. I just haven't used it. The trees in this area cause so much signal blockage that it's useless. So that was not a big deal to me to lose that. That was fine. So here's probably what most of the people are wondering is how did I connect the joying head unit to the existing Rockford Fosgate amplifier and speakers? And the first thing that folks have asked me is, well, couldn't you just take the speaker outputs from the new head unit and connect it up to the wiring harness to drive the Rockford Fosgate amplifier? The answer is no. If you take the amplified output, the speaker outputs from the joying head unit, it's too much. Little tiny volume adjustments could cause the volume inside the cab to go up dramatically. And you can easily overdrive the original Rockford Fosgate amplifier. So it's not only distorted, but you could actually damage it. So it's too much. So, okay, we can't use the amplified output. Well, the joying head unit has line level outputs. Can we use the line level outputs to drive the Rockford Fosgate amplifier? You'd think that would be a thing. It's not a thing. It turns out that the joying head unit follows sort of the consumer standard for line level output. And the consumer standard is about 2 volts. You can find more than that in some of the other car stereos, but the joying output, 2 volts, kind of follows the standard. The Rockford Fosgate head unit also used line level, but theirs was at 5 volts. So if you use the line level outputs on the joying, it's way too quiet. And if you turn it up really loudly, you end up with distortion and noise coming from the head unit. So that's no good. So what do? How do you drive it? How do you make the Rockford Fosgate amp go? Well, I chose to use the Scosche OEA4 4-channel adjustable factory amplifier interface. So the OEA4 connects to the 4 speaker outputs on the joying head unit, and then it reduces those levels to a level that's more appropriate for the Rockford Fosgate amplifier, 5 volts. So in the top of the OEA4, there's 4 little tiny volume controls, and you need to be really careful. I'm going to stress this. You need to be really careful with these things. It's very easy to turn these too far and break them off or override the end point, and it doesn't work right anymore. So be really careful with these. Treat it very, very carefully, and it'll be fine. They're just these tiny little controls that are soldered onto an internal circuit board. So what I had to do is I had to take the 8 wires for the 4 speakers from the head unit and solder those to the input wires on the OEA4. Then I had to take the output wires from the OEA4 and solder those to the harness adapter that I had purchased that then would plug into the Nissan wiring harness. So that's 16 solder connections. It was tedious, but it worked. I set each of the OEA4 gain adjustment knobs to the same position. So I'd get the same volume across all 4 channels, which was slightly less than halfway up. And this gives enough gain at the original Rockford Fosgate amplifier. Works great, sounds good. I get good control from the head unit, and the noise and distortion is kept down. So what about the subwoofer? We didn't hook up a subwoofer output. Well, there's a little magic that happens here. You see, when you hook up all 4 channels, the Rockford Fosgate amplifier will do the crossover to the subwoofer and amplification of the subwoofer all by itself. It takes those 4 channels. It says, ooh, here's some bass in here. I'm going to send that to the subwoofer. You don't have to do anything extra. You get the subwoofer for free. So which harness did I use when I was connecting the joying harness to the stock truck harness? Well, this is tricky. It's one of the reasons I'm making this video. There's about a bajillion different harnesses out there that say they're for Nissan vehicles, and finding the right harness that will work with a 2013 Nissan Frontier Rockford Fosgate system, that was a little tricky. But here's what I used for the harness connection. And this is the main harness. There's actually 2 harnesses. So the main harness, I use the RDBS 20-pin harness, and I'll give a link to that. The thing that makes this kind of cool is it does include the steering wheel control wires. And I was able to connect those or solder those directly to the joying steering wheel harness wiring without any extra controller, and they work great. It works just great. So the RDBS harness includes all the other usual connections: speakers, the remote amplifier turn on, which will control your Rockford Fosgate amplifier. It's got the 12-volt constant power. It's got 12-volt accessory power that's switched. There's a wire there that tells your head unit when the headlights are on, so it can dim the screen, and a ground wire. And I should make a note. I've read that some of the Nissans don't actually do a good job of grounding, and they'll have a ground wire in the harness that doesn't actually go to ground for some reason. Apparently they count on the stereo itself to ground. And in my experience, the ground wire in the harness in my truck works. I didn't have to provide a separate ground wire to the truck. Things are just working. So your mileage may vary, but that worked for me. There is one other wire included in the RDBS harness, the vehicle speed sensor wire. The joying head unit is not going to use this wire. The vehicle speed sensor wire provides digital messages that describe the truck's speed and whether or not it's turning. Now, this information was used by the Rockford Fosgate navigation system so that when there was no GPS signal, like if you're in a parking garage, it would still give navigational updates. So as you turned your way around the garage, your navigation would update. It's a cool feature, but it's not used by the joying head unit. There's a secondary harness that was installed. I used the Scosche CRT NN01, and this allowed me to retain the original backup camera. Now, when you blow up the original backup camera to 10.5 inches, it doesn't look great, but it's usable. And maybe I'll replace the backup camera with a higher resolution camera later. At least I won't have to install new wiring. It's all there. Now, when the truck goes in reverse, the backup camera pops right up. Everything works. It's great. Nissan has a kooky connector for the radio antenna, and so you have to replace that. I use the Metra 40-NI12, and you'll notice when you get this connector that there's a wire hanging off the side of it. That's for power, and if you don't hook that up, then there's an antenna amplifier in the truck that won't get power, and you won't hear much radio, if at all. The good news is the joying harness has a wire specifically for antenna power and will turn it on when it's necessary. So make sure you connect that so you can get your radio. GPS was a breeze. I used the Sticky Deal SMA male to Fakra C Blue male and plugged it right in. Just super easy. Plugged right in. I had a connection, and it works great. I get lots of satellite reception. The USB adapter for the center console was also very easy. I used the Metra AX-NIS USB-2. One end plugs into the existing Nissan harness. The other end is a USB connector that plugs into the back of the joying head unit. Done. I wasn't sure if I was ever going to need an auxiliary audio input, but I went ahead and ran an RCA extension cable from the back of the joying head unit to the tray that's underneath the dashboard. Don't know if I'll ever use it, but I thought, as long as I'm installing this thing, I might as well put it in there. So what about that original microphone I didn't chase that. So the original microphone in the truck actually integrates through the Bluetooth module. And the Bluetooth module is separate from the original head unit. So I'd have to go find the Bluetooth module, go through the loom of wires, find the right wire for the microphone, solder a bunch of connectors, run wires back through the dash, back to the head unit. I didn't want to deal with it. Plus, I kind of felt like the original location for the microphone that's in the roof of the cab, I thought that's not great. So I'm just using the microphone supplied with the joying head unit. I don't use a microphone very often, so not a big deal to me. So when you put in the double DIN radio, there's gaps on the left and right sides. And someone might wonder, did you buy the beauty panels to finish that off? Nope. Did not. Well, isn't it ugly? Nope. You got a 10.5-inch screen that's in the way. You can't see any of it. Looks great. I kind of figure, hey, ventilation should be good. So am I happy with the way the whole thing turned out? You bet. Everything except the original microphone works. Navigation is great. Sound is great. Screen looks great. I wouldn't want anything bigger in the truck because it would block off the ventilation. Otherwise, it's all good. A couple of extra thoughts that you may want to know about. The original Rockford Fosgate head unit had a very heavy loudness curve that was at low volume. So you turn the volume down, the bass would get really boomy and heavy. By default, the joying unit has no loudness curve at all. And if you start running the joying head unit, it'll sound like the subwoofer isn't working. It's working. You can enable a loudness curve in the joying setup, but it's not nearly as heavy-handed as the Rockford Fosgate curve. So you can go in and use the joying EQ and balance controls, and you can get just the tone you want. So that's a thing you should know about. I know some folks are going to want to do cell connection. I got it going. It turns out that the GSM implementation in the joying head unit is compatible with some of the frequencies used by T-Mobile in the United States. So I went down to T-Mobile and I signed up for $10 a month to get 2 gigs on their monthly tablet plan. Put that in the truck and it's working great. In fact, I get better reception on the joying unit than I do on my cell phone, probably because the joying antennas are way bigger than my cell phone antennas. A couple of tips for you on getting this to work the best you can. First of all, when you get your SIM card and you put it into the joying caddy, there is a trick. So not only do you need to make sure the orientation is correct, but there's a silver clasp that comes down to hold the SIM card in place. So when you bring it down, you're not done. It actually does a little slip up. It's not very far at all, but there's this little slip up and it clicks. If you don't do that little slip up and click, the joying head unit will not see the SIM card. It says there's no SIM card there. Save yourself some heartache. Make sure when you drop that silver clip down and you get that little click, that it happens. Second, after you put in the SIM card, you do have to reboot the unit. And it's funny how many places I went to where they said, oh, simply reboot the unit. And they said, how do you do that? They don't tell you how to do it. They just say, just reboot the unit. Okay. Take your screen, pop your screen off. At the bottom of the front of the unit, there's a little hole. Take a wooden toothpick and very gently click in there. It might take a couple of tries, but you'll find the reset button and you just click it. Don't push and hold, just click it. Your screen will go off when you get it to the right spot. That'll cause the unit to reboot. Then it'll discover your SIM card. Some people have reported that if the time zone in your joying head unit is not correct, if it doesn't match your actual physical location, the SIM card won't get discovered. That wasn't a problem for me, but I thought I would mention it. Finally, if you want the best reception, make sure you don't, there's the 2 GSM antennas, don't put them side by side like this. Don't put them parallel. Get them at some sort of angle to each other. That'll get you the best diversity in your cell phone reception. So one of them is going to pick up the strongest signal and you'll have the best signal you can. Well, that's a bunch of noise. I hope something in this was helpful. If there are other tips that you know about that I missed, put them in the comments so other people can find it. For now, I'm Dave. Thanks for watching.